Professor Zixnack glided into the lecture hall, his gelatinous form trailing a faint line of glowing residue. The alien students, a colorful mix of species from across the galaxy, observed him with equal parts intrigue and unease. A few snickered, their laughter ranging from melodious chimes to odd gurgling noises. "Quiet down, class," Zix's voice gurgled, his universal translator hanging near what could loosely be called his neck. "Today we have a guest lecturer, an Earth native, hailing from the infamous Deathworld. She'll be demonstrating basic human biological processes." His words oozed mock seriousness, as did the slime dripping from his tendrils. The announcement sparked a wave of murmurs, squeaks, and a sound suspiciously like a leaky balloon. "An Earthling? Aren't they strong enough to crush metal? My neighbor's cousin saw an Earth squirrel once. They still haven't recovered." Zix lifted 3 of his 7 appendages to restore order. "Settle yourselves. Our guest is mostly harmless. Please welcome Dr. Sarah Connor." The door slid open with a dramatic hiss, revealing a petite, human woman. As she stepped inside, the room fell eerily silent. Several students instinctively retracted into their shells or folded their exoskeletons defensively. "Hello, everyone," Sarah greeted brightly, her cheerful tone contrasting with the visible apprehension around her. "Who's ready to learn about human anatomy?" A trembling tentacle rose from the front row. "Dr. Connor," the Zorian student asked hesitantly, "is it true that humans have bones?" The word was spoken like a forbidden secret. Sarah smiled. "Oh, absolutely, and today we'll explore them up close. Who's ready for a hands-on demonstration of the human skeleton?" The silence was broken only by the faint splort of a gelatinous glip-glop fainting in the back row. "Tough crowd," Sarah muttered as she unpacked her supplies. "Okay, let's start with something simple. Who wants to see a real human bone?" The entire room recoiled in unison. Some students scrambled to phase shift out of the room. Others emitted glowing puffs of stress spores. Now, Zix interjected, his tone almost scolding. "We are scientists, are we not? A little organic material won't hurt you." Sarah rolled her eyes, pulling a femur from her bag. "It's not dangerous, just a regular bone. See?" She held it up like a prized artifact. Chaos erupted instantly. Tentacles thrashed, shrill noises filled the air, and a few students began molting on the spot. A Zorian in the middle row started releasing bioluminescent spores in panicked bursts, filling the air with shimmering clouds. Sarah sighed, setting the bone on the desk. "I was expecting curiosity, not a mass meltdown." "Oh, for crying out loud," Sarah muttered, setting the bone down on the desk. "It's sterilized, and it's not even human. It's from a cow." This clarification only seemed to escalate the horror. "You preserve the bones of the creatures you eat," a shocked Blix Black stammered, its eye stalks retracting so far they almost vanished into its body. Sarah pressed her fingers to her temples, silently counting to 10. "Okay, new plan. Let's discuss something less alarming. How about human digestion?" The tension in the room eased slightly. Tentacles relaxed, eye stalks cautiously extended, and the bioluminescent puff clouds started to settle. "Perfect," Sarah said with a bright smile, pulling out a diagram of the human digestive system. "It all begins in the mouth, where we use these amazing things called teeth to." She didn't even finish before chaos erupted again. "Teeth? You mean bones in your mouth?" "Well, technically, they're not," Sarah tried to explain, but her voice was drowned out by panicked shrieking. "They crush food with bones. How do they not destroy themselves every time they eat? Is this why they can survive spicy food?" In the corner, Professor Zixnack, who had been observing quietly, raised a gelatinous tendril. "Dr. Connor, perhaps we should pivot to a less provocative topic." "Fine," Sarah sighed, rolling up the digestive diagram. "Let's go with something simple. The human circulatory system, just some tubes and liquid. Nothing scary about that." The class leaned forward cautiously, showing signs of curiosity. "Great," Sarah continued, unveiling a diagram of the circulatory system. "Blood is pumped through the body by the heart, which is basically a muscular organ that—" "A muscle?" A Quentin shrieked, its voice modulation spiking so sharply it shattered several nearby containers. "You mean you have a chunk of meat inside you forcing liquid around?" "Well, when you say it like that," Sarah began, but another voice cut her off. "How does it not tear you apart?" Sarah's lips twitched into a mischievous smile. "Sometimes it does. We call it a heart attack." The resulting pandemonium was instant. Students scrambled over one another, some attempting to squeeze through the air ducts, while others curled into defensive balls and rolled chaotically across the room. Professor Zixnack oozed up beside Sarah, his gelatinous body rippling in a way that radiated frustration. "Dr. Connor, I suggest we reassess our strategy." "Good idea," Sarah replied, watching as a Zorblat tried to wriggle down the emergency chemical shower. "Got any suggestions?" Humans? The professor's eye stalks swiveled thoughtfully. Perhaps something external, something visible and non-threatening. Sarah tapped her chin. How about human hair? It's harmless, right? Zixnak's form quivered in what Sarah took as agreement. An excellent idea. Even the more delicate students should handle this just fine, Professor Zixnak agreed. Sarah clapped her hands, the sharp sound triggering a chorus of startled squeals from the class. All right, everyone, new topic, human hair. Completely harmless, I promise. The students hesitated but settled, their wary gazes and sensory organs locked on her. Human hair, Sarah began, running a hand through her own, is made of a protein called keratin. It grows in various places on our bodies, but is most noticeable on our heads. A cautious tentacle rose. Is it alive? Sarah laughed. No, not at all. The hair itself is dead protein, though it's produced by living cells in the skin. The room fell into an uneasy silence as the class digested this information. Then, predictably, panic erupted. You're covered in dead things. It keeps growing even though it's dead? How do you sleep surrounded by corpse fibers? Sarah groaned, throwing her hands up. It's just hair. Look, it doesn't even hurt to pull it out. Watch. She plucked a strand of hair from her head, intending to demonstrate its harmlessness. It backfired immediately. The sight of Sarah casually removing part of herself sent the class into hysterics. Some students climbed the walls, literally, while others screamed about regeneration and unnatural rituals. She tore off part of her body like it was nothing, a student wailed. And it's moving. It's still moving, another shouted, pointing at the hair strand, which was indeed fluttering slightly in the breeze from the ventilation. A glibber nod in the front row flashed through every color of the visible spectrum before settling on a queasy shade of green. Sarah turned to Professor Zixnak, desperation written across her face. A little help here? Zix's eye stalk swiveled toward her, his gelatinous form sagging with something akin to exasperated resignation. Dr. Connor, I suggest we reconsider the scope of this lecture. Good idea, Sarah muttered, ducking as a panicked flutterbee flitted overhead, shedding a shimmering trail of distress pheromones. Maybe human biology 101 was too ambitious. Perhaps we should start simpler, like humans, myth or reality? As if on cue, a Zorblat student peeked out from under a desk, its eye stalks quivering with excitement. Oh, I know that one. Humans are obviously a myth, a species that can survive above freezing and below boiling? Ridiculous. Sarah opened her mouth to argue but quickly shut it, recalling the chaos her explanations had caused. She took a deep breath, plastered on a smile, and said, You're absolutely right. Humans are just a tall tale. This whole thing, elaborate hoax. You figured it out. The class relaxed immediately, many nodding with the self-satisfied air of students who believe they've outsmarted their teacher. I knew it, the Zorblat declared smugly. Next, you'll try convincing us that humans can see colors or something equally ridiculous. Sarah bit back a retort and forced a smile. Exactly. You've got it. Humans? Totally fake. Complete fiction. Not real in the slightest. The students, now relaxed, began chuckling at their earlier gullibility. Sarah caught Professor Zixnak's gaze, his gelatinous form rippling in a way she had learned to recognize as silent amusement. Well, Dr. Connor, Zixnak burbled, his translated voice laced with humor, I believe we've had enough excitement for one session. Perhaps it's time to adjourn and let the students recover. Good call, Sarah agreed, gathering her materials, most of which hadn't even been touched. Same time next week for advanced human mythology? Zix's eye stalks swirled thoughtfully. Indeed, though perhaps we should rename it Improbable Xenobiology Tales to keep things less inflammatory. As Sarah packed her things, she couldn't help overhearing snippets of conversation from the students. Can you imagine we almost believed it? A species that could survive on a water-based planet? Ridiculous. And eating both plants and animals? Who comes up with this stuff? Sarah sighed, shouldering her bag as she made her way to the exit. A small pipkin scuttled toward her, its exoskeleton clicking nervously. Excuse me, Dr. Connor, it said in a rapid chitter. I have a question about those mythical humans. Sarah paused, bracing for another wild misconception. Sure, what's your question? The pipkin's antennae twitched with excitement. Is it true they can survive for days without absorbing nutrient paste through their exoskeletons? For a moment, Sarah considered explaining the intricacies of human metabolism, how meals worked, and the joys of cooking. Then she remembered the chaos she'd caused earlier and thought better of it. Nah, she said with a wink. That's just another crazy rumor. Everyone knows real creatures need hourly nutrient baths paths to survive. The Pipkin nodded, clearly satisfied. I knew it. My clutch mates are going to be so impressed with my xenobiology expertise. As the students scurried off, Sarah glanced at Professor Zixnack, whose body was once again rippling with laughter. Dr. Connor, Zix said, oozing closer, I must admit, this has been one of the most entertaining guest lectures in recent memory. I don't think I've seen the class this animated since the time we convinced them that gravity was just a cosmic prank. Sarah chuckled, shaking her head, happy to bring some excitement. Though next time, maybe I'll stick to something easier, like human myths about aliens. That does make me wonder, how do you even teach biology if they can't handle the idea of bones? Sarah asked, crossing her arms. Zix-Nack's eye stalks swirled in a gesture Sarah had come to interpret as a shrug, very delicately and with a lot of creative adjustments. For instance, when we studied Arcturian physiology last cycle, I might have conveniently left out the fact that their crystalline lattice structure is essentially an internal skeleton. And they didn't lose it over that? Not at all, Zix replied. As far as the students are concerned, Arcturians are held together by quantum probability fields and multidimensional adhesive forces. It's complete nonsense, of course, but it avoids the panic. Sarah shook her head, stifling a laugh. That's one way to do it, I guess. But doesn't it bother you that they're walking around with completely wrong information? Zix-Nack's gelatinous form rippled in what Sarah assumed was his version of a resigned sigh. Dr. Connor, after many cycles of teaching, I've learned that education isn't always about absolute accuracy. Sometimes it's about opening minds to new possibilities. These students come from environments where what we consider normal is utterly alien, sometimes terrifying. Expecting them to immediately grasp Deathworld biology is unrealistic. So instead, you just lie to them? I prefer to call it gradual acclimation, Zix corrected with a hint of humor. We start with hypothetical concepts, presenting creatures like humans as fictional examples. Over time, we introduce more realistic ideas, carefully framed to avoid overwhelming their instincts. Sarah considered this, leaning against the desk. I suppose that makes sense, but it's still frustrating. I came here hoping to share knowledge, to build bridges between our species. Instead, I feel like I've just confirmed every scary Deathworlder stereotype. Zix extended a gelatinous pseudopod, gently patting Sarah's arm in what she guessed was meant as reassurance. On the contrary, Dr. Connor, you've accomplished more in one lecture than many manage in a lifetime. Sarah raised an eyebrow skeptically. How do you figure that? Think about it, Zix said, his voice carrying a tone of encouragement. Before today, most of these students had never seen a human in person. Their understanding of your species came from exaggerated tales and overdramatic survival stories. Today, they met you, a real human. They saw that you're not a terrifying monster, but a sentient being capable of communication, patience, and even humor. Sarah smirked. Even if they now think I'm a mythical creature? Especially because of that, Zix replied, his eye stalks twirling in amusement. You've become a point of fascination instead of fear. That's a step forward. Mark my words, Zix-Nack said, his tone dripping with amusement. By next cycle, half the class will be diving into human mythology, trying to untangle fact from fiction. It's the first step toward real understanding. As if to confirm his prediction, a small group of students cautiously approached Sarah, their various sensory appendages fixed on her with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Dr. Connor, a flutterbee buzzed nervously, its translucent wings vibrating with energy. Is it true that humans can survive in temperatures high enough to boil water? Sarah glanced at Zix-Nack, who gave her an encouraging ripple. She turned back to the students with a warm smile. Funny you should ask. In human mythology, there's this thing called a sauna. The students leaned closer, their quivering sensory organs betraying their rapt attention. A sauna, Sarah continued, is said to be a small, enclosed space that humans willingly enter. Inside, the temperature is raised to nearly boiling, and steam fills the air. They sit there for long stretches, and some stories even claim they pour water onto hot rocks to make it even steamier. A collective gasp rippled through the group. But why? A grubber asked, its skin shifting through an array of incredulous hues. For fun, Sarah replied, her grin widening. And for something they call relaxation. Absurd, the flutterbee exclaimed, its wings buzzing with excitement. What's next? Are you going to tell us they immerse themselves in dihydrogen monoxide for leisure? Actually, Sarah said, her eyes twinkling, there are myths about swimming pools and beaches where humans do exactly that. They love splashing around around in huge bodies of water. Sometimes for hours, the students erupted into a chorus of shocked murmurs, their fascination battling with disbelief. But wouldn't they dissolve? A saurian asked, its tentacles curling in a gesture of confusion. You'd think so, Sarah said, barely holding back laughter. But according to the stories, humans have a remarkable ability to repel water. They get wet, and then, this is the best part, they just dry off. No melting involved. The saurian's eye stalks twisted in an attempt to process this. Impossible. Next, you'll claim they can survive the vacuum of space. Sarah opened her mouth to respond but quickly shut it, remembering Zixnak's earlier advice about gradual acclimation. Now, she said with a chuckle. Even myths have their limits. Zixnak oozed forward, his gelatinous body rippling with what Sarah had come to recognize as mirth. Indeed, Dr. Connor, I think we've given the class enough to consider for one day. Perhaps it's time to adjourn and let them reflect on these fascinating tales. The students reluctantly dispersed, their chatter filled with equal parts awe and disbelief over the incredible feats of mythical humans. As the students trickled out of the classroom, Sarah caught snippets of their chatter. Can you believe they willingly sit in extreme heat just for fun? I heard they can regrow limbs, well, the smaller ones like fingers and toes, that's absurd. Next, you'll claim they can see colors beyond ultraviolet. Shaking her head in amused disbelief, Sarah turned to Zixnak. Well, that was something. Do you really think this approach is going to work? Zix's eye stalks twirled thoughtfully. Dr. Connor, in my many cycles of teaching, I've learned that the road to understanding isn't always direct. By framing human biology as mythology, we've sparked their curiosity without overwhelming them. They'll leave here questioning, researching, and debating, which will teach them far more than a straightforward lecture ever could. I suppose, Sarah said with a sigh, it's just frustrating. I'm standing right here, a living example of humanity, and they're treating me like some kind of cryptid. Zixnak's gelatinous body rippled with what Sarah now recognized as his version of a chuckle. Ah, Dr. Connor, consider this. Not long ago, most of these students saw humans as terrifying Deathworlders, capable of unimaginable destruction. Now, they're intrigued by the idea of humans as mythical beings with extraordinary abilities. Isn't that a step forward? Sarah had to admit he had a point. I guess you're right, but where do we go from here? I can't keep pretending to be a mythical creature forever. Patience, Dr. Connor, Zix burbled. Or, as your people say, Rome wasn't built in a day. Or was it hatched from an egg? I can never remember your idioms correctly. Sarah laughed. Close enough. So, what's next on the improbable xenobiology fiction syllabus? Zix's eye stalks twirled in amusement. I was thinking we could explore the fascinating myth of human reproduction. I'm sure the students would be captivated by the concept of live birth. Sarah's eyes widened in alarm. Oh, absolutely not. I am not explaining human reproduction to a group that nearly fainted over a cow bone. Let's stick to something safer, like, I don't know, the myth of human bioluminescence. Zix's body rippled with curiosity. Bioluminescence? That's a new one. Do tell, Dr. Connor. I don't believe I've encountered that particular human legend. For a moment, Sarah considered clarifying that humans didn't actually have bioluminescent abilities. Then she remembered the chaos of the day and decided to play along. Oh yes, she said, trying to keep a straight face. According to legend, humans can make their teeth glow in the dark. It's a defense mechanism. They bare their teeth and light them up to scare off predators. Zix's eye stalks quivered, and Sarah could tell he was suppressing laughter. Teeth that glow in the dark? Fascinating. I can't wait to see how the students react to that myth. Sarah smirked. Oh, they'll love it. Just wait until I tell them about the mythical human ability to withstand cold by generating heat from within. Zix's body rippled with laughter as they exited the room. Fascinating. And here I thought glowing teeth were just a side effect of excessive caffeine consumption. Zixnak burbled, his gelatinous form rippling with amusement. You truly do learn something new every day, don't you? Sarah nodded, struggling to keep a straight face. Absolutely. Human biology is just full of surprises. For instance, did you know we can detach our thumbs at will? It's a little-known survival trick. Zix's body quivered as he let out a bubbling laugh. Dr. Connor, I do believe you're mastering the art of creative interpretation. Sarah grinned. When in Rome, right? Or wait, was it when in the egg? I always get those idioms confused. Zix's laughter echoed through the now empty classroom. Well, Dr. Connor, I think this might just be the start of a brilliant academic collaboration. As they left the room, still chuckling over increasingly ridiculous human myths, Sarah felt an unexpected sense of achievement. Sure, she hadn't taught the class much about actual human biology, but perhaps, just perhaps, she had taken a step toward bridging the gap between humanity and the wider galactic community. After all, if they could laugh together about glowing teeth and detachable thumbs, maybe Deathworlders weren't so terrifying after all. Unbeknownst to Sarah, her impromptu myth-making was about to spiral out of control. By the next cycle, the campus would be abuzz with wild rumors about the incredible abilities of humans. Students would be daring one another to activate their non-existent bioluminescent teeth, and more than a few aliens would end up in the medical bay after attempting to remove appendages they didn't actually have. But those were problems for another day, or perhaps for another myth, depending on who was telling the story. As Sarah and Zixnack parted ways, the human professor couldn't shake the feeling that she had just set something in motion, something bigger than she had intended. Whether it was the beginning of genuine interspecies understanding or the galaxy's most absurd chain of misinformation remained to be seen. One thing was certain, though: xenobiology lectures would never be the same again. Weeks passed, and Sarah's improbable xenobiology fictions class became the hottest topic on campus. Students from every discipline scrambled to attend, captivated by the increasingly bizarre tales of mythical humans. Sarah found herself inventing ever more fantastical stories to satisfy their boundless curiosity. She spoke of humans regrowing teeth, true, but only for children, holding their breath for hours, a playful exaggeration of free-diving records, and the mysterious appendix, an organ with no apparent purpose, which, to her relief, was entirely accurate. The students couldn't get enough. What had once been fear of humans morphed into a strange mix of wonder and obsession. Sarah often overheard them whispering in the hallways, debating which myths could be real. "I heard they can go without sleep for days. That's nothing. Apparently, they can digest rocks. My cousin's roommate swears he saw a human lift a hovercraft with its bare manipulators." Sarah wasn't sure whether to laugh or cringe. While the rumors were ridiculous, she consoled herself with the fact that the students were no longer terrified of humans. Confused, yes, wildly misinformed, absolutely, but at least not scared. One day, after class, a Zorit student scuttled up to her, its eye stalks quivering with excitement. Dr. Connor, it chittered. "I've made a groundbreaking discovery about humans." Sarah braced herself, half dreading what was coming. "Oh, let's hear it." The Zorit's exoskeleton practically buzzed with enthusiasm. "I've been doing independent research, and I figured out why humans have so many incredible abilities." "Have you now?" Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," the student exclaimed. "It's because they're not a single species. Human must be a general term for multiple species that look alike but have different adaptations." Sarah blinked, momentarily stunned. "I'm sorry, what?" The Zorit began pacing, its many legs clicking rapidly against the floor. "Think about it. How could one species survive in both extreme heat and extreme cold, or combine incredible strength with fine motor skills? It doesn't add up, unless humans are actually a collection of distinct species." Sarah opened her mouth to correct the student, then paused. Given the patchwork of myths she'd fed them and the contradictions they'd heard, it wasn't an entirely unreasonable conclusion. "That's an interesting theory," she said carefully, trying to suppress a smile. The Zorit's eye stalks swayed proudly as it beamed. "Thank you, Professor. I'm considering making this my thesis, Humans, a xenobiological study of convergent evolution among Deathworld species. What do you think?" Before Sarah could formulate a response, Professor Zixnack oozed into the room with his usual gelatinous elegance. "Ah, Dr. Connor," he burbled. "I trust I'm not interrupting anything important?" "Not at all," Sarah replied quickly. "Our student here was just sharing some fascinating theories about human biology." Zixnack's eye stalks swiveled toward the Zorit. "Is that so? Please do elaborate." The Zorit launched into an enthusiastic explanation of its hypothesis while Sarah exchanged a look with Zixnack. The subtle rippling of his body betrayed his silent laughter. "An intriguing hypothesis," Zixnack said when the Zorit finally finished. "You should explore it further with Dr. Connor. I'm sure she can provide valuable insights from her extensive knowledge of human mythology." Sarah shot Zixnack a glare but nodded. "Of course. Why don't you drop by my office hours next week? We can discuss your thesis in more detail." The Zorit bounced with excitement. "Thank you, Professor. I have so many other theories to share. For instance, I think I've figured out how humans achieve bioluminescence. It involves symbiotic bacteria." As the student continued to chatter excitedly, Sarah sighed, resigning herself to yet another round of damage control and creative storytelling. She glanced at Zixnack again, who offered her an apologetic ripple. "Well, Dr. Connor," he murmured, his tone amused, "it seems your mythological approach is more successful than we anticipated. The students are thinking critically, forming theories, and engaging in independent research. Isn't that every teacher's dream?" Sarah let out a reluctant laugh. "I suppose it is, but I'm not sure this is what the galactic education educational board had in mind when they approved this cultural exchange program. Zik-Snak's body rippled with humor. Perhaps not, but they did choose a Deathworlder to teach xenobiology to students who faint at the mention of bones. All things considered, I'd say we're exceeding expectations. As the Zoret left the room, still chattering about its theories, Sarah couldn't help but see Zix's point. This wasn't traditional education, but it was undeniably effective. So, Sarah said, turning to her colleague, "Do you think we should tell them the truth or let them keep believing humans are some kind of mythical superspecies?" Zik-Snak's eye stalks twirled thoughtfully. "That depends. How do you feel about becoming a legendary figure in galactic academia?" Sarah shook her head with a laugh. "Honestly, I think I preferred it when they were just afraid of me. It was so much simpler." "Perhaps," Zix burbled, his voice warm with amusement. "But where's the fun in that? Besides," Zik-Snak added with a mischievous ripple, "imagine the papers we could write. The mythologization of Deathworlders. A case study in xenobiological education. We'd be legends in the field." As they left the classroom, still debating the balance between truth and creative storytelling, Sarah felt an unexpected spark of excitement. This wasn't the teaching experience she'd envisioned, but then again, nothing about working at an alien university had been what she expected. And maybe that was the essence of xenobiology, to embrace the unexpected, to marvel at the strange and unfamiliar, even when that unfamiliarity was, ironically, herself. As they parted ways, Sarah couldn't help but look forward to the next class. There were so many myths to debunk, or perhaps embellish. The galaxy clearly wasn't ready for the unvarnished truth about humans just yet, but with creativity and patience, she might just bridge the gap between Deathworlders and the rest of the galaxy, one ridiculous myth at a time. Over the cycles, Sarah's improbable xenobiology fictions class had become a campus phenomenon. Students from every corner of the galaxy competed for a seat, eager to hear about the mythical humans and their supposed extraordinary abilities. Fear had given way to awe, and the once cautious aliens now approached her with enthusiasm, eager to ask about everything from human diets to peculiar mating rituals. During one such lively Q&A session, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Dr. Connor, a gelatinous BBL student, burbled, quivering with excitement. "Is it true that humans can regenerate lost limbs like the legendary Hydroterra?" Sarah opened her mouth to craft yet another tale but hesitated. She glanced at Zik-Snak, who was quietly oozing in the corner, his eye stalks sparkling with amusement and a hint of challenge. With a mental shrug, Sarah decided to take a different approach. "That's an interesting question," she said, "but what do you think? Based on what we've discussed about human biology, does limb regeneration seem plausible?" The room erupted in a chaotic symphony of alien voices, their chittering, bubbling, and warbling filling the space as they launched into animated debate. "It has to be true," a glowing Zorga declared, its spores pulsing with excitement. "If they can regrow teeth, why not limbs? Limbs are just bigger teeth, aren't they? That's ridiculous." A Kinter snapped, its modulated voice humming with disdain. "If humans could regenerate limbs, why would they rely on those crude prosthetics we've heard about? Maybe they can only regenerate small parts." A timid glip-glop ventured from the back of the room. Like their fingers. Those are pretty small, right?" Sarah bit her lip to suppress a laugh and exchanged a glance with Zik-Snak, whose gelatinous form quivered with silent amusement. The debate raged on, with students using every human myth they'd learned to argue for or against the possibility. For the first time, Sarah realized that her creative teaching approach wasn't just sparking curiosity, it was encouraging critical thinking. Even if it revolved around glowing teeth and limb regeneration, these students were engaging with ideas, questioning assumptions, and learning how to explore the unknown. She couldn't help but grin. This might not be traditional education, but it was working. The alien professor's gelatinous form rippled with silent amusement. Sarah cleared her throat, bringing the class back to attention. "Those are some fascinating theories," she said, fighting to keep a straight face. "But let's think scientifically for a moment. What evidence would we need to prove or disprove the possibility of human limb regeneration?" The room fell quiet as the students turned their various sensory organs toward her, listening intently. "Well," a Flutterby ventured nervously, its wings vibrating, "we'd need to actually see a human regrow a limb, right? Direct observation would be essential." "Excellent point," Sarah said with an encouraging nod. "Direct observation is key to scientific inquiry. Any other ideas? We could study human cellular structures," Aaron exclaimed, its tentacles waving in excitement. "If humans had regenerative abilities, it would surely be evident at the cellular level." Sarah couldn't suppress a proud smile. Despite the absurd context, her students were applying real scientific reasoning. Maybe this mythology approach wasn't such a bad idea after all. Very good, she replied. Now, based on what we know or think we know about human biology, what challenges might humans face if they could regenerate limbs? The room erupted into lively discussion again, with students proposing theories ranging from the immense energy demands of regeneration to the risk of regrowing extra appendages if the process went wrong. Sarah guided the conversation as needed, marveling at their creativity and engagement. They debated with genuine enthusiasm, blending their newfound critical thinking skills with the bizarre myths they'd come to embrace. As the class wound down, Sarah felt a surprising sense of pride. Sure, her students still believed some wildly inaccurate things about humans, but they were also learning to question, to analyze, and to approach even the strangest ideas with scientific rigor. After the last student filed out, still animatedly discussing the logistics of hypothetical human regeneration, Zixnack oozed over to Sarah's desk. "Well, Dr. Connor," he burbled, his eye stalks twirling with amusement, "that was quite a show. I don't think I've ever seen the class so engrossed in xenobiology." Sarah leaned back in her chair with a grin. "I'll admit, this isn't how I pictured my teaching career going, but I think we're actually getting somewhere." "Indeed," Zix agreed. "They're learning to think critically, to question assumptions, even if those assumptions happen to include glowing teeth and detachable thumbs." Sarah laughed, shaking her head. "It's a start, I suppose. But don't you think it's time we started introducing some actual facts about human biology? At this rate, we're going to create a generation of xenobiologists who think humans are supernatural beings." Zixnack's gelatinous body rippled thoughtfully. "Perhaps," he said, his tone contemplative. "But consider this." "Perhaps," Zixnack said, his tone thoughtful. "But think about this, Dr. Connor. When these students first arrived, they were terrified of humans. The idea of a species surviving on a death world like Earth was incomprehensible to them. Now they're captivated. They're curious. They want to understand how your kind has adapted to such an environment. By thinking we have superpowers?" Sarah quipped, raising an eyebrow. "By believing that extraordinary things are possible," Zix corrected. "Their minds are opening to ideas they never would have considered before. In the process, they're becoming better scientists, better xenobiologists." Sarah couldn't deny he had a point. "So what's next? Keep spinning tall tales about human abilities?" Zix's eye stalks twirled with mischief. "Oh, I think we can do something even better. How do you feel about a field trip?" A field trip?" Sarah blinked, caught off guard. "Where exactly?" "To Earth, of course," Zix burbled, his enthusiasm unmistakable. "It's time these students experienced a death world for themselves, under carefully controlled conditions, naturally." For a moment, Sarah was speechless. Then a grin slowly spread across her face. "That's actually not a terrible idea, but maybe we should start with something less overwhelming, like a visit to a human space station." "An excellent compromise, Dr. Connor. I'll start making arrangements immediately," Zix replied, already oozing toward the door, muttering about safety protocols and intergalactic permission forms. Sarah shook her head, laughing softly. She had come to this alien university to teach xenobiology and to bridge the gap between humanity and the galaxy. Things hadn't gone as she'd expected, but perhaps this odd journey through human mythology was exactly what was needed. If her students could confront their fears and embrace the unknown, even through exaggerated tales of glowing teeth and detachable thumbs, there was hope for true interspecies understanding. And if that understanding came with a side of absurdity, so be it. Packing up her materials, Sarah's mind buzzed with ideas for the field trip. She imagined her students' reactions to seeing real humans in their natural environment, or at least in a space station habitat. After all the myths and legends they'd eagerly absorbed, the reality of human biology might be even more surprising. As she left the classroom, she chuckled to herself. The journey ahead would be challenging, but she was ready. If all went well, the students might leave this experience not just as xenobiology experts, but as allies to humanity, albeit ones who still believed in detachable thumbs. In the grand scheme of things, Sarah thought that wasn't such a bad outcome. With a spring in her step, she headed off to plan what promised to be the most memorable field trip in the history of xenobiology. The galaxy, she realized, still had plenty of surprises in store.